Well, thank you for being with us today. You've been with us how long?
I started end of January this year. Yeah. So almost a year.
Awesome. And what do you do with us?
I do a few things. Mainly my role is the event coordinator. So right now we're working through creating like an event calendar. We're working through creating our 2025 event calendar. And I am now also in the engagement team, which
Hmm.
includes creating or coming up with ideas for more engagement in the community. That's
Hmm.
with volunteers, donors, events, fundraising, and such. So my role has kind of become much more broad now.
Hmm.
And then the fun thing I think is Tony and the Welcome Network has been very kind to me in that I get to explore different talents and different gifts that I didn't know that I had or was interested in. So there's a lot of different little projects that I've been involved in, which has been really fun. The other thing that I do is I also coordinate the volunteers for the asylum program. So it's a volunteer run program basically, and I have to match families with volunteers to
Hmm.
help with the asylum process.
Awesome. So, to learn a little bit more about you, you're an immigrant yourself. So, what's your personal immigrant story?
Yeah, I was born in León, Guanajuato, Mexico, March of 92. And my parents had recently started going to a Christian church. They, kind of a weird story, but there was a new church plant in our town that actually had connections with Fairhaven Baptist Church here in Indiana, which is
Oh,
just
wow.
bizarre. I know. So it was a brand new little Baptist church in our town. And when my mom was pregnant with me, they started to come around and introduce themselves to my parents. And my dad was like, no, I don't want anything to do with church. And they told him, we're just read the Bible and, we'll come back in a month. And he was like, no, I'm going to prove to you that that's none of that is true. And they
Hmm.
came back in a month and they tried to explain. He had a bunch of questions. They tried to explain things to him, and then he became a Christian then. And then soon after I was born, and my parents, I mean, I grew up going to church and everything. So that was kind of an interesting story that kind of went full circle when I moved to Indiana, and I actually went to Fairhaven, and that was really funny. My parents connected with folks that they met when I would like before I was born, and it's just so weird the way God works. But anyway, I was born in León, Guanajuato, Mexico. I had two older sisters. My parents always kind of had a tumultuous marriage. So there was a time where my dad had come to the US to work. They struggled financially quite a bit. And then in 80 something, way before I was born, my grandpa had come and he through like the amnesty, the Reagan amnesty, and my grandpa had obtained status, but he lived in Mexico. And my grandpa would tell my mom, you guys should just try to leave this area. And he kind of would tell my mom, I'll try to sponsor you if you guys leave. So over the years, finally, my parents decided, let's try it. Let's try to go
Hmm.
to the US. And they had a small business at the time in Mexico that was failing, so they decided to leave. And my dad went first for a few months. I don't know exactly how long he was gone before we joined him, but my dad went to live with one of my mom's uncles in LA. He raised a little money, he worked for him, raised a little money, and then sent for my mom and my sisters and I to join him. And I remember, I mean, I was 2 years old, but I remember the night that my mom said, we got to catch the bus. And I
Hmm.
remember getting on the bus. It was one of those like charter buses that had like blue velvet seats. And I sat on my mom's lap. My sisters were small. They sat next to us. We took one row, and I was tracing the lion. It was like a golden shaped lion that was stitched onto the back of the seats.
Hmm.
And we kept asking my mom, where are we going? Where are we going? Why are we leaving our stuff? We left everything. Our house was still filled. My parents owned that house and all of our stuff was still there. My parents had the idea that we were going to return, that we were going to, like my grandpa, go to the US, adjust status, be able
Hmm.
to work, and then return to our house. So
Hmm.
everything was left there. And my mom kept telling us, we'll be back, we'll be back. And we were scared. It was the middle of the night, and my mom just I guess being held by my mom sitting on her lap, I felt more comfort, but I know my sisters were crying and they were scared.
Hmm.
And after that, I do remember that the other memories that I have, I remember crossing the river. I remember being cramped in a car, my sisters crying in the back, and I also remember being in a house. I mean, I remember snippets of things. I mean, at 2 years old, I loved to sing. I always loved to sing. And I loved to like dance and perform. I loved people's attention.
Hmm.
And I remember we were in San Diego waiting for my dad to be able to raise the money to pay the coyotes to so that he can pick us up. Because I think he had paid half or something, but he owed a portion of it. And we were in that house for longer than we should have been. I do
Hmm.
remember being there. My mom would cook for the families that would go. And I remember that I used to sing to the people that there were no beds. I don't remember there being beds. I don't remember there being furniture. It was just an empty house. And I remember that people would ask me to sing. And I would sing Christian music. I'd sing Alabare, Alabare, and people would love it. And I remember someone got sick. I don't know who it was. And the gentleman that was, I guess, in charge of the house, he told my mom, pretend like you're my wife and these are my kids, and we're going to go to the pharmacy. And we
Hmm.
did. We walked to the pharmacy, the local pharmacy, and we came back and things seemed normal in my head. It was like, oh, this is our friend helping us. And I remember he said, pretend like you're, just my daughter. He carried me on his shoulders and we're, walking like everything was normal. And eventually, my dad was able to pick us up, and we ended up moving to LA. We lived
Hmm.
in LA with my uncle for a little while, and I have vivid memories of that. We lived in his backyard and on a little trailer. We have pictures that I look through, and I'm like, I remember that. The trailer didn't have a working kitchen.
Hmm.
So my uncle, I don't know if it was like a little stove, but my mom would cook out there in his backyard. And we moved to our own apartment. And in that time, as soon as we got here, I know that my mom found a church. We started going to a church nearby and we started inquiring about how we can adjust status.
Hmm.
And my grandpa tried to do it through his residency. I know that he was working through becoming a citizen, and my mom was trying to figure out how, she could be petitioned by him. But that ended up being, she was told that she'd have to return to Mexico. Like there were like a lot of things that kind of kept us from doing that,
Hmm.
pursuing that more. Then we tried to do it through my dad's work or something. There was something started through that. And I think the more promising one was through church. Our pastor tried to help us adjust status and something happened. I don't know exactly the determining factor, but we lost a lot of money because my dad kept working, paying whatever attorney. And then we stopped hearing from the attorney. The attorney just stopped responding to calls and my
Hmm.
parents didn't know what to do, so they just kind of gave up.
Yeah.
And then we just lived in LA. And I remember my sister and I always asked my mom, hey, mom, when are we going to return to Mexico? You said we're going back. And she always said, when you're as tall as my neckline, right
Hmm.
here, when you guys get as tall as this, then we're going to return to Mexico. And that was the promise my mom made us. And so every chance we got, we would like stand in front of her and try to reach. And I remember the desire I had of returning to Mexico. I mean, I had all my family there. We loved going to my grandma's house. And my cousins, I miss my cousins. It was a desire to return to Mexico since I was very little. But we, went to church there. We went to school there. It kind of just became life. And I always had in the back of my mind that I would return, that I would, that at some point we'd live in Mexico or whatever. But as I grew, I always knew also my mom never lied to us about our status. She was always very, very clear with things. She said, there are things we cannot do. And she would always, especially me, because I wanted to do everything. I always wanted to play sports and I wanted to, be a ballerina and play like all the stuff.
Yeah.
Mom, she was always like, we need to be careful because we can't do this, we can't do that. And she always kind of not held me back, but like had to like reel me back in, like, you just have to remember that there are things we can't do. So I kind of lived in that way, like understanding I'm different or I like there's things that I can't do here. And I didn't like that. I didn't
Yeah.
like that at all. My sisters like they didn't really, I mean, I've never asked them, but it seemed like they were kind of more cool with that. I was not. And I remember fourth or fifth grade, at some point, there was a trip that I was offered to visit like New York or something, and I couldn't go because like I'd have to fly by myself. They asked for insurance and like all these things, and I was so bummed. Then there was another thing in middle school where my friends were all going to Spain, and we could raise the money. Like it was, and I was telling my mom, I can do it. I can raise the money, and I was so excited. I didn't understand. Like I understood my status, but I didn't understand that those are things that I just can't do.
Yeah.
There was no way that I could earn it because that was for like those opportunities were like because of your grades. Like you had to earn it. There were like specific programs, and I was always really good at school. So in my head, I was like, it does not make sense that I get these opportunities and I can't do them. And
Yeah.
that always frustrated me. Yeah, there was a lot of things that we just couldn't do. And through church, because, we were very involved in church, we were able to do all the stuff with church. Like they took us to Disneyland every year. We did, trips to like Six Flags and camping trips and, just all the stuff. And that was cool. And my mom took advantage of those opportunities, things where we didn't feel so left out, but the other stuff was really tricky. So growing up, it was a lot of no's, and that
Yeah.
was frustrating.
In
You could,
California, right?
yeah, in California.
Where specifically in California?
I grew up in LA.
Okay.
Yeah, East
LA,
LA,
LA, East LA.
East LA. Yeah.
Like Baldwin Park, Duarte.
Baldwin Park. Well, it was my neighborhood was called City Terrace. So it
Okay.
was right off of the 10 freeway and the 60, like where the 10 and the 60 almost meet. The
I used
7.
to work in Baldwin Park and I used to live in Monrovia for a
Oh,
summer.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I think you mentioned that before. Yeah, I was right by Cal State LA. Cal State
Mm.
LA was the college that we like our school would take field trips to, and we were just, I don't know, 5-minute drive from there. So that was another thing that college was always something that I wanted to pursue. And I remember, I don't know if it happened one time or if it was just like a constant thing that I would tell my mom, like, why are we here? We can't even do anything. And and she said, Gabby, you just keep getting good grades. You just keep doing the best that you can. Don't break the law. Just be a good person, be a good citizen, quote unquote, and just keep doing everything you can so that when you're of age, the government can't say no to you. And in my head, that translated to I can earn my citizenship. Like
Yeah.
it's like a challenge that I'm willing to accept. And so I
Mm.
did. I did the best that I could, all the programs that I could take advantage of. I did. I did all the clubs, I did the sports. Like I tried to do within the realms of, what I was able to do. I was going for like I'm gonna go to college and I'm like they can't say no to me. And besides, like I really enjoyed school. Like I really liked to learn.
Yeah.
And I had like a 4.6 GPA my junior year, and all the counselors were like, "Oh yeah, you can go to this school and this school and that school." And I started getting like letters in from different colleges trying to poach me, and it was so exciting. And my senior year is when I realized this is going to be trickier than I thought because they might accept me, but then how am I going to pay for them? I can't get financial aid. And then all the realities started to hit me. And there
Mm.
was a period because I turned 18 in March, right before I graduated. There was a period where I thought, like, what am I doing all this for? A counselor told me, you just keep working really hard and maybe there'll be a chance for you someday to adjust status. And I was kind of not depressed, but I was kind of just being really down. And I thought, you know what? I have English. Like, I'm going to get my high school degree and I'm going to go back to Mexico and I could teach English. And I honestly thought to myself, like, I'm tired of being undocumented. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of getting no's. I want to be able to have full access to everything. And I
Yeah.
thought, I'll just go back to Mexico and as an adult, and I'll live my adult life in Mexico. And I thought I had a great opportunity to get my, US high school diploma. Like there's so many things that I know I could do. And I was ready. I told my grandpa, like, I think I want to go because my grandpa still would go back and forth. He still lived in Mexico sometimes. And I told him, like, I want to go. I want to go live in Mexico. And when I started to apply to colleges, my counselor would tell me, you can still get scholarships. And it was a very confusing time.
Yeah.
I was very devastated because I got into a couple private schools that I really like wanted to go to, but it was like $50,000. And I remember sitting in one meeting with the recruiter, and it was my dream college. I went to go to Biola University, and I thought if I can go there, I'll stay. I won't go to Mexico. And I got in and I got a scholarship. I got like $12,000 merit scholarship. And I was like, wow, I've never seen so much money. And I was so excited. But I'm sitting in the meeting with my mom with the recruiter, and they're like, okay, so this is what this is the money figures. And he shows us, and he's like, this is what is due by August. And it was like thousands of dollars, like tens of thousands of dollars. And I looked at my mom and I looked at the guy and I'm like, well, what about the scholarship that I got? And he was like, well, that's like, obviously you subtract from that. And we split that scholarship between the 2 semesters. And he's like explaining things. And I'm just looking at him like, I can't do that. And it hit me like I either have to go back to Mexico or go to community college. And it just didn't make sense to me. Like, when you're a senior and you're like, I've done, I have like a 4 point whatever GPA and I've done all the stuff. And like, I'm
Yeah.
going to community college. What is this? So
Yeah.
that was rough. But somehow the Lord works. Just like everything just fits so perfectly. I went to community college. I was able to pay for it on my own. I started working at a local restaurant. I put away my thoughts of going back to Mexico and I just kind of pushed through and thought, I'll figure it out. My second year, I feel, yeah, my second or almost second and a half year of community college, I found out that DACA was a thing.
Yeah.
And I was one of the first participants or the first applicants. I was scared. A lot of people were scared to apply. I remember some of my peers were thinking, what if we apply and then they have our information and then they know where we live? And so it was scary to be one of the first applicants. But once I obtained DACA, I think I felt a little bit more free, like more like I belonged, because I
Hmm.
was able to get my license. I was able to drive and apply to different things, work legally. Like there were things that DACA gave me that I hadn't felt before.
Hmm.
Or like, yeah, like little liberties. I mean, there was like this like thought in the back of my head thinking, I definitely do not want to get married to obtain status. I don't want to cheat my way to be able to work. And so DACA kind of gave me that like relief.
Yeah.
And I thought I could continue my studies. I don't have to, be so worried about being deported. And that was exciting.
Did it make it easier to apply to universities or programs outside of community college? Or
Um, uh, I think by the time I had DACA, I had already applied to the schools like the universities that I was going to transfer to. Or
yeah.
like I was either applying already or I had already applied, especially because there were people that I knew weren't documented in high school. They went to public schools right off the bat.
Yeah.
I didn't apply to any public schools right off the bat because I didn't know that I could.
Hmm.
I had no idea that I only applied to private schools, thinking a private school is not going to ask me those questions, which looking back, it was kind of silly. But there were people that I knew that they told me, why didn't you apply to public schools? You could have got in. And so that was another thing that was really frustrating, not knowing what my options were.
Yeah.
But so then that's kind of how I thought, well, I'll transfer out and I'll go to a public school. And that's what I ended up doing. I applied to mostly public schools. I applied to Stanford. Besides that, it was all other public schools. And DACA, I think DACA was more of like I had a social. So when it asked me on the application, like, what's your social? I had a social to put in. And that's like,
Hmm.
I can't explain how exciting that was,
Yeah.
to be able to fill that out. But besides that, I think DACA gave me the assurance that no matter where I go, I can work. And I've always been really hardworking. I never asked my parents for a dime going to college. Like I told my mom, my dad even told me, you don't have to work. Like, why are you working? I can support you. And I said, no, I want to do it. I can do this on my own. And so it was scholarships, it was whatever little side jobs I could find. And so DACA gave me that like security that I could work. I could
Hmm.
find ways to support myself and not put this on my parents.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. And I didn't get like it's not called a full ride because it's not public funds, but through like different maneuvering of scholarships, I got my tuition paid off to go to a university.
Hmm.
And that was really fulfilling. When I got accepted, the joy that I felt was pretty immense. My parents had a Bible study in our garage, and I was clicking through refreshing to see what schools I got into. And as soon as I saw, because UCLA, that was one of my dream schools at that time. And they said yes. And I ran downstairs and I interrupted Bible study. They were praying. And I'm like, no, got it to UCLA. And oh man,
Hmm.
they were all, the whole Bible study was shouting and like
Yeah.
excited. They knew, they knew like how exciting that was.
Yeah.
And then some of the other schools started coming in and I started to see. And then Berkeley, I knew nothing about Berkeley. It was far. I just applied because my counselor was like, you might as well, you get another one free. Might
Yeah.
as well apply to that one too. And I did, and I was like, and I got into Berkeley, and everybody's like, all right, but she's going to UCLA. And not until I visited the schools when I realized, like, no, I want to go to Berkeley, and
Hmm.
that's where I mean, I guess that kind of goes into the next question.
Yeah, I have a question before that. So, what makes
Sure.
Berkeley stand out more to you than UCLA?
There was something personal that had happened when I was that young, and I wanted to leave.
Hmm.
UCLA like was one of my dream schools, but I knew that I had to go far away.
Hmm.
And UCLA wasn't far enough. And also I was also kind of really independent,
Sure.
just like overall. Like you ask my mom and she'll say no, she was ready to leave very young. And my mom told me, well, if you go to UCLA, we'll help you pay for a car and you can just live at home and drive to school. And I was like, I don't know.
Hmm.
But I knew that I needed to go.
Hmm.
And I wanted that. I had that feeling of like exploring. I mean, I had already made up my mind earlier when I was 18 that I was going to leave to Mexico and live on my own. I had that sense of what's out there,
Yeah.
and when I went to visit the school, we took a bus. It was like adults, young adults from my community college that took a trip together that got accepted to visit the school. And then other local community colleges too joined us. And getting to know other people that also wanted to leave. They all kind of had a similar desire to leave LA. Plus, they had a really exemplary undocumented student services
Hmm.
program. A lot of other schools, like even UCLA, would get ideas from that program. So that
Hmm.
was exciting to me
Yeah.
that like this is like the leading undocumented student resources program for the UC system here. That means this is where I need to be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what did it for me. And I mean, as soon as I made that decision, like there was no questioning.
Hmm.
Like did I make the right decision? No, that was it. And that's where I met my husband. So
Woo.
that was yeah, so that was another plus. Yeah,
That's
that was
good.
yeah.
So
So
going to the next
mhm.
question, your bio on our website says that you studied legal services at Berkeley. Where does the personal and professional interest overlap for you of your studies? And are there any
Yeah.
stories from yourself personally or from cases that you've had to work on or advocate for that really inform your passion and conviction?
I think when I initially got DACA, my initial application, like going back to community college, my initial application, it was a lot of money. Because
Yeah.
again, I was very stubborn and I told my parents, I'm gonna pay for this. I'm gonna pay for this. So somehow someone told me that the Mexican consulate in LA was helping people apply.
Hmm.
So I went there. And the girl that I was speaking to, like she was from Mexico, but she spoke English and she helped me. And I kind of watched her fill out the application. And I thought to myself, like, that's really easy. Like these questions are so simple. I can fill that out. And she kind of walked me through the process. And it was the first time applying. So I just trusted her. But the second time, like when I had to reapply for DACA, I kind of wanted to do it on my own. And I thought, if she could do it, I could figure this out. By
Hmm.
that time, I was at Berkeley and my major was psychology. I wanted to be a forensic psychologist. So I wanted to, like, I got to Berkeley and I thought, like, the psychology program must be, exactly what I want. It was not. It was very brainy and it was very not what I expected. Later, I learned that UCLA actually has a forensic psychology program. So that would have been interesting. But
That is interesting.
yeah. But I was already after like my first year at Berkeley and like taking those classes in psychology and thinking like this isn't really what I thought I would be learning and doing. I started exploring and maybe I can double major. I'm halfway done through this major. Maybe I can add a couple classes and I started exploring. And it was that same time where I started looking into clubs that were helping people reapply to DACA. So there was like a lot of things that kind of led me to think like maybe a legal degree. Like I could do legal studies. A lot of the classes overlapped with psychology.
Yeah.
So I started to kind of like shift focus to a legal degree. And then I joined the Latino, what was it? LPLS. It was like the group of Latino students that were headed towards law school. And I
Mm,
joined that club thinking this could really like help me to see if that's something I want to do. And it did.
mm.
I literally shifted all focus to I want to go to law school. And I took an immigration law class. It was mostly about the background or like the history of immigration in the US and immigration law in the US. But part of my work in that class, I had to go to the immigration court and I had to sit in one of the courts and listen to the process that was going on. And it was an asylum case. And I remember the reason why the gentleman, his attorney's defense was that the gentleman had gang tattoos on him
Hmm.
or like tattoos that seemed like gang tattoos. It was actually not defined if it was affiliated with gangs, but it seemed like gang tattoos. And the attorney was saying that if he was sent back to his country, that he would be murdered on the spot because of the tattoos. And there was like a whole argument on that. And I was thinking, like, that seems so silly to argue, but that excited me, thinking, if you're an attorney, like, you got to find your angle. And that exposure of sitting and listening to something live like that was so cool. And
Yeah.
then after the court adjourned, the judge asked me, "Why are you here?" And I told him, "I'm a student. I'm a Berkeley student. And, this is part of my final." And he's like, he was so excited. And he talked to me for like 20 minutes, and he was giving me some
Mm.
tips. And I think that exposure really was it gives me the chills thinking about the kind of like excitement that I felt
Yeah.
um, that me, little old me, could probably be doing some of that work. There was another opportunity that really exposed me to the desire, and this is probably a story that was more the driving factor, like the why of it, it became very personal. But
Mm.
anyway, so I joined this night class, or I don't remember what it was called, but it was a group of Berkeley students that would learn about the prison system.
Mm.
And I think it was monthly or if not weekly. I went about 6 times. We would go to San Quentin, the prison north of San Francisco. And we would go into the prison and we would tutor the prisoners that were trying to get their GED.
Mm.
And like there was very strict rules. We couldn't actually talk about personal things. We had to wear like very specific, like all black or blue, baggy clothes. Our hair had to be tied back, no makeup. Like we had to be like there were a lot of strict rules, and it was thrilling for me. I was like, oh, because I wanted to be a forensic psychologist at one point. So I was like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
And sitting in like one of the tutoring sessions, all we did was basically after they had their like lecture, we would stand around and if any of them asked for help, we would sit next to them and we'd explain like whatever math or English or whatever.
Mm.
And there was one room that would like there was a math room, there was an English room, and there was one room that was generic, but it was for Spanish speakers.
Mm.
And so if you were bilingual, you would probably go to that room. And I always picked that room. And I had an uncle who was in and out of the prison system. And I never hung out with that uncle because he terrified me. But being in that room, it was like a bunch of men that resembled my uncle. And
Yeah.
so I was terrified at first, but the one of the first gentlemen that asked me for help, I sat by him and you could see sadness in his eyes and he's asking me about math and trying to explain to him and then he's like, "Where are you from?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't share personal information with you, but let's get back to math." And I'm trying to like refocus to math and then he just started telling me his story. And it was so interesting that I could not, like, I just sat there and listened. And his story was, like, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but he worked for his family was coyotes, people that would
Mm.
bring people into the US. And he went into why he was in prison. And it was a very sad story,
Yeah.
very unfair. And it kind of brought, like, obviously it was personal because I was once a child that crossed over and was with coyotes in a house for weeks.
Mm.
So hearing his story and I mean, I asked my mom several times, "Mom, did anybody hurt you?" Or when we crossed over, and she always said, "I don't know how, Gabby, but the Lord protected us. Like we were blessed beyond. They loved us so much. Like like we were in that house longer than we were supposed
Mm.
to. We were never hurt or, nothing." She's like, "I don't know how that happened, but it was a very dangerous place. Here I am, like young woman with 3 little girls, under like 5, 6, and we were fine. And hearing this gentleman's story of like some of the craziness that can happen and some of the really sad and terrifying things that happen to people made me want to help him. And I
Mm,
couldn't, I just listened to his story. I couldn't even add on. Like there were rules about the kind of conversations. Just listening to something personal, even was they didn't tell us no, but they would tell us like try not to go into any personal things. So I didn't even know how to react. And I felt like crying and I couldn't show any emotion. So I'm just sitting there listening and things were happening within me that I just was like, what do I do about this? Why am I sitting here next to this gentleman listening to the story that is so impactful and like what am I going to do with it? And
hmm,
that kind of continued that like desire to like for advocacy for people like this gentleman or for people like myself. I remember my mom told me that is why probably why his story was kind of personal too. My mom told me that the men in the house when we like the coyotes, when my dad was gonna pick me up, when they finally reached my dad had, whatever money left over to come pick us up. He was on his way from LA to San Diego to pick us up. And the men were pleading with my mom to keep me. They were telling her, we'll pay you whatever you want if you give us your daughter.
hmm,
And my mom's like, no, that's crazy. No. And she was like, they weren't aggressive about it, but they definitely were serious. And they
hmm,
definitely said, we'll give you back all your money, but just leave us your daughter. And she was like, no, no, no. But hearing this gentleman's story of the craziness that happens, I mean, he grew up with coyotes. His
hmm.
family was all coyotes. Like he saw it since he was a child and then he grew into it. And hearing that kind of, I guess, was a little personal because at some point, if my mom was a little bit unhinged, she'd be like, yeah, give me my money. Here's my kid. That could have been
Hmm.
me. And
Yeah.
so that kind of definitely stirred up something inside me. And I wanted to do more. In that capacity, I couldn't. I couldn't do anything for the gentleman. I never actually saw him ever again. I came
Hmm.
back a couple times and there was a different group of men and I never saw him ever. I don't know what happened to this gentleman, but his story, what it did to me is forever.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do something meaningful that meant more than making money or meant more than this is what I chose to do with my life. I wanted to continue to reinvigorate the excitement of this is why I do what I do. So that was basically what I felt it was my calling.
Hmm.
And it was more so, it wasn't even like the degree, like the law degree. It wasn't really like having a title. It was about advocacy for me. And when I spelled that out in my brain is when I thought I could advocate through law, but I could advocate in other areas in the meantime as well. So that's why I started considering teaching. That's why I applied to Teach for America at that time. It's because I
Hmm.
thought before I go to law school, I could probably use my desire to advocate in a different area. And I love kids. I
Hmm.
mean, I always, something I didn't mention, but I constantly would tutor. At church, I would teach the little kids, and in my summers, I'd go back to LA and I'd tutor in my fifth grade teacher's class sometimes. I tutor her class. There were different things that I would do that were always around kids. So I thought I could do Teach for America, and that could be a little break between school and then going to law school.
So is that how you segued from Teachers of America brought you to CPS or
Yeah,
okay.
that's why I ended up in Chicago. Well, my husband moved here after he graduated because this is where he's from and this is where his kids were living at the time. So he moved back to be close to his kids. And so when I applied to Teach for America, I had to put up what options I wanted, like where to teach.
Hmm.
And I chose Chicago as my number one, and then Dallas and Boston. And I got Chicago to be close to him and to because Teach for America placed me in Chicago, I moved to Chicago and I started
Nice.
teaching at CPS.
Cool. Chicago, Chicago, or the suburbs?
I lived in Chicago. Initially, I got an apartment. It was Chicago, but it was Easton
Okay.
was my street, but I don't know the name.
So are you up on the north side?
That was north, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
my school was in West Humboldt,
Okay.
but I lived right off the freeway, right off the 94.
Your
I,
school was in Humboldt Park?
my school was West Humboldt, yeah.
I
Yep.
teach in Humboldt Park.
You do?
I
Well,
do.
I taught at Casals.
Okay.
Casals,
I teach at KIP.
Pablo Casals.
Or I
Oh,
teach
nice. I have a
yeah.
friend that I think she still teaches at KIP, and she was nearby. Well, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Or
Mm.
I teach for Malcolm X College at KIP. So I
Oh, okay.
teach migrant parents English.
Oh,
So
that's cool. Oh, yeah. We met someone that you referred to us.
oh, that's fun.
Yeah, he was really nice.
He is a nice guy. So, being a CPS teacher, what are the needs of newcomer communities in the city that you were able to see through into that role as a CPS teacher?
I think one of the biggest things that I noticed was the lack of information. Some people don't know what their options are for
Yeah.
them or their kids.
You've already mentioned that even in your own personal story.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oftentimes, people, especially immigrants that are undocumented or don't have family that is documented, they rely on word of mouth a lot. And there is a fear to go and consult someone that does know, an attorney or a representative. And I mean, that was part of like my story. But I noticed like there was one student I remember, we were already towards the end of the year. We had back to school night, and the mom was I knew what she was asking me because I was undocumented.
Yeah.
But her line of questioning was very ambiguous. Like it wasn't direct. I am undocumented, my child is undocumented, and we need help. Like what resources?
Yeah.
It was never like that. And I could tell what she was doing because I mean, I understand. And I told her, you know, I'm undocumented, right? And I have DACA. I'm able to teach your child because I have DACA. And she didn't know that she had options or that her child had options. And that moment was when I like inside I felt this is why I chose this job, you know, because I can
Mm.
still advocate I didn't expect to meet students that were also undocumented. I expected to meet students that maybe their parents were immigrants and the children just didn't have someone like a mentor around that could kind of guide them, like you can also go to college or you can also do this.
Mm.
And that's kind of the advocacy that I expected. But like this specific family, because she heard the teacher's also undocumented, like the teacher has a way to have a job and live a semi-normal life.
Mm.
Like that's in it, I could see the light in her eyes of, whoa, she hadn't even thought that could be possible. And I stayed connected with her. I tried to share resources with her. It was more so of through my story, I could give her ideas and that hope that my child could have a normal life here. And I didn't give her consultation of what her legal options are, but I would push her, there's many attorneys that give you free consultations, look and seek answers. There's so many, you might have an option
Mm.
for you or for your child. And so that was really exciting. It had nothing to do with really with the teaching. It was more of the advocacy for her and her child and also the confidence that talking to someone that went through it kind of gave her hope and confidence. So that was really cool. But mostly it was, I think they didn't know what they didn't know.
Mm.
There were programs and options and things that could be sought out if they just asked. That was one of the biggest things that I noticed in CPS.
Mm.
I always ask really open-ended questions to parents back to school nights to see kind of how they answered or how they took things. I was always very open about my status. Not that I would like blasted it, but on a one-on-one, I did tell parents like, oh, where are you from? And I tell them, oh, I'm
Mm.
from León, Guanajuato. And that usually would lead into a conversation about my immigrant story.
Yeah.
And I was very comfortable with that. I mean, the number of times I shared my story as a student in Berkeley was almost exhausting, like
Yeah.
constantly sharing my story. And then, donors and fundraisers, they love to hear that stuff. So I was constantly sharing it. So I became very comfortable with sharing that. And so as a teacher, I had no problem. And my principal was super supportive too.
Mm.
She was like, yeah, you have the right to be here. You work and you advocate to your kids however you can. And you make connections with the parents, gain their trust however you want. And that's
Mm.
how I think I did mostly. The parents really trusted me because I was also an immigrant and I could relate with them in that way.
Yeah.
So that was really cool.
Cool. So how did you get involved with the Welcome Network?
I had been home just not working for a couple years and I had a desire to do something. And I was just talking to a friend from church who is an attorney, but she's a different kind of attorney. And I was just telling her, I have a legal studies degree. I've thought about going back to school, maybe even pursuing law school at some point, but I have it's been a lot of years that I haven't done anything. And she's like, my friend Tony. And she started telling me about the Welcome Network. And she told me months before I even looked it up. She kept asking me, have you looked at the Welcome Network? And I told her, no, not yet. And then when I finally looked at the Welcome Network, I noticed, well, they're not hiring. So it wouldn't be for work. I'll probably become a volunteer. And I filled out the volunteer application or questionnaire. And Jared called me and he sounded so excited about my resume. Being a stay-at-home mom for a couple years does things to you that
Yeah.
even talking to another adult that appreciated my resume was wild to me. Okay, like it's not a big deal. But he was just so excited. And he's like, we'd love to have you on. And like, he's like, can I send you this email? Blah, blah. And he's like, I'm going to tell, you know what? I have to talk Tony about you to Tony and this and that. And I'm like, okay. And then we hang up and he sends me information. I was kind of unresponsive for a little bit because I was busy mom life and that was kind of like put off to the side for a little bit. And then a few weeks later, I finally reached out, or I think actually, I think your wife reached out to me. I think Laura Grace texted me and she was like, hi, Jared, send me your info. And are you interested in helping me with a case? And I was like, sure. What's the time commitment? And she made it so easy. She was like, you can just come to my house and whenever you're free. And then she, like the way she organized things. And it was so nice to feel like I'm jumping back into something that I love, but it's at like a very slow pace was really nice.
Mm,
And we worked on that case. I think it was like from October to January. In around December, she told me that the Welcome Network was hiring and to reach out to see if it's something I was interested in. But I did not want to work because it was like a set schedule and I just wouldn't work out for me being home. But I, talked to Abby and everything. And then I got hired to work from home majority of the time. And somehow, again, the way the Lord worked, it just worked.
mm,
And Tony was super flexible with my schedule, and I work from home mostly. And then again, somehow the Lord worked where I was able to find a preschool for my daughter that I'm comfortable with. So I'm able to come in a lot more now
mm,
since the fall. So it just kind of things it wasn't like a drastic change. Tony and the Welcome Network have been super flexible with me wanting to still be home with my kids most of the time. But also God has like opened doors for me to feel like I'm slowly diving into something I really love. So
mm. So, what Welcome Network cases have affected you personally to see how our work is necessary?
well, I work mostly with cases. I work mostly with asylum,
Mm,
and helping matching volunteers and sometimes often hearing the story or reading through their story. I always think of that gentleman from San Quentin because obviously he was like my introduction or like the face to what happens in the border
yeah.
to some of these families, especially families that are seeking asylum and they've already come from a tragic story and then they come to the border and then they see more and then they come and I sometimes feel like not responsible, but in a little bit it's my duty to welcome them or
Mm,
to be the segue into better experience with humanity. Like oftentimes the people that are seeking asylum, I that was not me, that was not my story.
yeah.
We didn't see awful things back at home that drove us out. So I don't relate with that, but I know the feeling of when someone tells you there's hope or I'm going to help you. That feeling I know. And sometimes like when I hear a story that's like it just breaks your heart, the part of advocacy is that part where I want to like help in some way.
Hmm.
Yeah. And sometimes it's even just sharing information. It's really that small. But the moment where people's faces light up because you shared hope or you shared information or you shared wisdom that they will understand because of their story, but the way you put it or the way it was like the situation, it gives them like relief
Hmm.
sometimes. That's my favorite part, I
Yeah.
think. It kind of continues to help me want to do this some
Yeah.
more.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And
Of
thank you
course.
for so much for sharing so much of your story. I'm walking away with so many things just personally from this interview. So thank you.
Oh, Charlie, you're welcome.